Good morning and welcome to the 4th annual Sahel-Transatlantic Dialogues at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. We are honored and delighted to host this important event. In the Western world, foreign policy these days is about great power competition. We approach the competition as a new development with all that it entails. In Africa, however, foreign policy is about choices and options. The Africans have been dealing with great power competition in different waves and forms for 500 years. Today, they welcome the emerging multipolar world because it is about choices and options. I am Mvemba Pezo Dizolele, Senior Fellow and Director of the Africa Program. The shift in the new emerging order calls for the redefinition of the nature of relations between the global North and Africa. The old ways whereby the word partnership sounds more like a slogan will no longer work. And nowhere is this adjustment more pressing than in the Greater Sahel, a wide swath of land that stretches from Mauritania and Senegal on the Atlantic coast to Sudan and Eritrea on the Red Sea. Recent development in the Greater Sahel, from coup d'etat, military and constitutional, to violent extremism, to war and drought, underscore this point. We need a new approach. We need creativity. We need to acknowledge and address the new dynamics and realities on the ground and not just wish them away with communiques, ultimatums, and sanctions. Democracy and good governance will remain abstract concepts in Africa if we do not invest in them as we have done in other parts of the world. Our security, humanitarian, and development assistance funding to the Greater Sahel does not add up to a story with a peaceful and stable ending. Let's do the numbers. The United States directed $3.3 billion in security aid to the Sahel in the past 2 decades. $150 million in humanitarian assistance in March 2023, and $235 million in development aid in 2022. Between 2015 and 2019, the European Union invested over $80 million in the Sahel through the Instrument for Stability and Peace program. And in 2022, EU humanitarian assistance stood at $250 million. In the 6 years between 2014 and 2020, the EU allocated to the Sahel $2.8 billion through the European Development Fund. In comparison, between January 2022 and July 2023, the US and the EU allocated over $70 billion and $138 billion, respectively, in military, financial, and humanitarian aid to Ukraine. The Sahel and Africa at large must become a top priority, not for the resources, not for the survival fortress Europe, not for terrorism, but for the common prosperity and human security of Africans and Westerners. The debacles in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, where France, the former colonial power, is in open conflict with the de facto leaders of this country, and now seeks to punish them through their population by canceling scholarships and student visas, or the United States struggling to call a coup in Niger for obvious reasons, speaks to the need for change. A coup is a coup, and we should be pragmatic in our approach. The over-militarization of EU migration policy is such as, for all intent and purposes, Frontex has moved Europe's continental border from the Mediterranean Sea to the Sahel. In the ECOWAS space, which promotes the free movement of persons and goods, this approach undermines cooperation and breeds resentment and anger. Meanwhile, ECOWAS and the African Union have fallen short of their mandate and popular expectations. Their approach to the rising coups, imposing trade and other sanctions that hurt civilians, and issuing ultimatums they cannot enforce, and to the various crises in the Greater Sahel, is at best incoherent and counterproductive. The military leaders remain in place, and the war in Sudan rages on. To be sure, we cannot afford to let the Sahel sink further into stability. These are great challenges, but require courage and adequate solutions. And we have invited the right people to help us navigate these obstacles. It is my honor to welcome and introduce our distinguished speakers for this first portion of our discussion. They will speak in the order of introduction. First, I would like to welcome Ambassador Santiago Cabanas, Spanish ambassador to the US, and ask him to provide his remarks after this introduction. Before Ambassador Cabanas was posted in Washington, D.C., he served in the same capacity in Algeria. Previously, he held top-ranking positions at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Spain, including Director of the Minister's Cabinet and Director General for Foreign Policy. Ambassador Cabanas has also been Director General for Consular Affairs and Director General for Cultural and Scientific Relations. He will then be followed by His Excellency Stavros Lambrinidis, Ambassador of the EU to the United States. Ambassador Lambrinidis has been Ambassador of the African Union to the US since March 1st, 2019. He has served as the EU Special Representative for Human Rights, and he has also served as Foreign Affairs Minister of Greece. He was twice elected as a member of the European Parliament with the Greek Social Democratic Party. He will be followed online by His Excellency Amadi Meimou, who is the High Representative of the Coalition for the Sahel, who has served as Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Mauritania and Commissioner for Human Rights, and also a member of the National Assembly. He was ambassador to several countries in Africa and the Middle East. Finally, not least, is Ambassador Molly Fee, the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs. Ambassador Fee was sworn in as the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs on September 30th, 2021. She has served as the Deputy Special Representative for Afghanistan Reconciliation, and was Ambassador to South Sudan. She previously served as Deputy Chief of Mission of the U.S. Embassy in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and as Chief of Staff of the Office of the Special Envoy for Sudan and South Sudan. Without further ado, Ambassador Cabanas.
Good morning to all of you, and thank you very much, Memba, Director of the Africa Program here at CSIS. Thank you to you and to all your team for making this possible and for organizing this dialogue, this 4th Annual Sahel Summit. Always glad to be here at CSIS. Please send my regards also to Dr. Hamre. We're always so pleased to be at this house. Thank you also to the EU delegation, Ambassador Lambrinidis, and to the State Department, Ambassador Fee, for all the cooperation we're having in all issues related to the Sahel. And my recognition too to Mr. Hamadi Meinu, the new coordinator for the Coalition for the Sahel. We really appreciate his participation in this event. And finally, my gratitude to our Ambassador at Large for the Sahel, Antonio Sanchez Benedito, especially relevant during this semester of our presidency at the Council of the EU, and to the team that has come from Madrid for this event and for our bilateral working group on the Sahel. And let me thank my colleague José Tovar, who has worked really tirelessly to make this happen. Before referring to the Sahel, I would like to just make a quick mention, as you have, to the African continent. With 2.5 billion inhabitants in 2050, that is 25% of the world's population in just 30 years, but only 2% of the world's GDP today, it is essential to strengthen our partnership with Africa. At this time of global crisis and uncertainty, the continent clearly expresses its legitimate desire to participate on an equal footing in global decision-making, given that those decisions have a great effect on the continent itself. And the latest milestone has been the African Union obtaining a seat at the G20. Also, the accession of Ethiopia and Egypt to the BRICS group at the recent Johannesburg summit is a sign of the growing interest of the African countries to be present in global coordination frameworks. For Spain, the closest European country to Africa, the future of the continent is, of course, a priority issue. The fact that these multiple crises that you have referred to, Vemba, security, food, climate, and demographic, are affecting the stability and sustainable development of many parts of Africa is a matter of obvious concern for us. But at the same time, we firmly believe in the great potential of the continent. Africa has youth, entrepreneurs, men and women, resources and vitality. In regions like the Sahel, these crises are becoming more acute, perpetuating a cycle of violence, coup, vulnerability and poverty of broad layers of the local populations. But apart from all these challenges, it's also important to refer to a geopolitical context that is marked by the presence of other actors, such as Russia and the Wagner Group mercenaries, as well as a growing anti-Western narrative that is strengthened by the active disinformation efforts by other actors. For my country, the stability and development of the Sahel is a strategic priority. We just have to look at the map to see how close and interconnected we are. We are logically concerned about the possible constitution of a wide zone of destabilization in the whole area. And in addition, Spain suffers from the consequences of institutional fragility in the region, with the irregular arrival of African citizens searching for a better life and coming from areas with a great nutritional vulnerability, a vulnerability that is also related to the Russian invasion and attack on Ukraine. During our presidency of the Council of the EU this semester, we will continue to strengthen the Spanish and EU commitment in the region with an integrated approach that combines security cooperation, development cooperation, humanitarian aid, and good governance cooperation. As we will be able, no doubt, to see in the discussions today, the challenges in the regions requires to maintain a close cooperation between all the actors who are interested in maintaining stability and finding, as you have mentioned, a new approach. We will only be able to do so if we work together. And the exchange of opinions with a partner like the United States, whose presence in the region is so notable, cannot but result in a better collaboration in the fight against all these challenges, in facing these challenges. In Spain, dear Ambassador, dear Assistant Secretary, you can be sure that you have a close partner, one that is truly interested in contributing to the stability of the region, and we deem, as I have mentioned, really strategic. Surely, our ambassador at large for the Sahel, Ambassador Sanchez Benedito, will offer a more complete and elaborate perspective. But before we started, I just wanted to offer a glimpse of the significance that both the continent and more specifically the Sahel, this region, have for the world, for Europe, for the European Union as a whole, and for my country. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Ambassador Panelist. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Dear friends, as Ambassador Campana has mentioned, the European Union's focus on Africa and the Sahel in particular is one of simply undeniable strategic importance and significance. You cannot defy gravity. You cannot defy the centuries of history, bad history, good history. You cannot defy the fact that the challenges of the future immediate upon us in so many ways can affect our relationship in tremendously positive ways and also potentially negative ones. And this is why, indeed, and I'm very glad that you mentioned this at the beginning of your introduction, the European Union's interest in terms of concrete contributions, not simply nice words, not simply proclamations, concrete contributions has been so remarkably strong and leading. And in the presence of Assistant Secretary Fee, let me just say as well that we have never lost sight of the fact that it is an imperative, an obligation for us, Americans and Europeans, to be working together as partners with our partners in Africa. It is a collective capacity to be able to be effective in that collaboration that, in our view, is going to make a difference. So here we are today at CSIS again. This is the fourth iteration of this summit, getting together, having discussions. I remember in the previous ones, or maybe Vlasia, and thank you for helping put this together for the EU delegation as well, maybe the previous one, we were discussing about the reasons that Europe is engaged, the hope that we see, the tremendous potential, as Santiago mentioned, in Africa as well. And we have been contributing, and in the past couple of years, one has to look at the trajectory, and it's not that great. So, of course, we need to be sitting down and thinking what's going wrong, because the potential is so remarkable. There's absolutely no doubt about it. The number of people, young people in Africa, bringing hope and just a dynamism for development and security and leapfrogging ahead in so many things, from the AI and the tech of the future to to green sustainable growth. I mean, that's huge. And yet, the Russians coming in doing what they do best, which is not to build anything, but just to make sure they can, bring anything down that is about to be built potentially by other people. Have we made mistakes? Absolutely. But you know what? I'm sick, a little bit sick and tired of sitting back and, flagellating myself. Oh, it's terrible, all the terrible things we did. It just doesn't make any sense. Let's move ahead. I very much appreciated, you were absolutely right in describing some of the real challenges in this and describing also a negative trajectory. So this is why I'm particularly grateful to CSIS today, because I hope, I really do, I don't have any magical answers, that out of a real, honest-to-God, good discussion here, we'll be able to get some. We have 500 people participating in this virtually. I don't know what kind of capacity or chance they will have for injecting questions or ideas in this. But Ursula von der Leyen said that we need to inject as Europeans as much commitment to Africa as we're injecting in Ukraine. We need to make sure that we follow the reality of a continent and a partnership that can be world transforming if it is done well. Exactly in the way that Ukraine could be world transforming, not for Europe, not for Ukraine itself, for the rest of the globe, if it succeeds against this terrible aggression. I would not be putting it in terms of, oh, you're giving 1p to us, 5p's there, 10p's there, why? That's not right. That's not the way to analyze this. I mean, the significance politically, geostrategically is absolutely, and I agree with you, absolutely clear. But the connections are also clear. I am deeply concerned when there are governments anywhere in the world who think that might is right, that they can actually use military force to take over a decision of a people to be ruled by one or the other person. That is exactly the same when it happens in Greece back in the 60s when a military dictatorship took over, or in Portugal or in Spain for that matter, or where it happens in Africa, or where it happens when a neo-colonialist called Russia decides to wipe off the map another country. If we don't manage as Americans and Africans together and Europeans together to understand the complexities of this world together, if we don't build a partnership that is based on the true belief that we actually are equal partners that have to align to defend fundamental values and needs that we believe in, such as the fact that the UN Charter matters, such as the fact that climate change is happening and we have to work together to make sure that we address it and we fight it. Unless we do this, I'm afraid we're going to be back every year discussing how we gave more billions here and there, Some people did better. More crises broke out, and here we are trying to compare miseries and figure out who's doing what for whom. We have to do something all together. I can tell you that the EU is very focused on a new strategy on Africa. We are looking at our investment, the Global Gateway, as some of you may have heard, is a huge investment instrument. We have committed $250 billion to Africa alone in investments next year's sustainable ones for sustainable development to really make a difference. We hope we can. And we'll be also looking at the positive narrative for Africa. It cannot be always that we get together, talk about how to put out the crises. We are going to do this together with African partners, and I hope we succeed. Because if we don't, it's bad for us, it's terrible for Africa, it's bad for the United States, it's bad, frankly, for the world, and I don't think that we have the luxury to allow this to happen. So thank you very much, and I really look forward to getting some wisdom out of these discussions today.
Thank you, Ambassador Lambrinidis. We're supposed to be joined by Ambassador Hamadi Meimou out of Mauritania. Ambassador Hamadi Meimou, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, President. Distinguished guests, as the Director and Senior Fellow, Mr. Dizolel, said in his kind words of introduction, I am Hamadi Meimou, High Representative of the Coalition for the Sahel. I have had the honor in the previous year to serve my country as Foreign Affairs Minister, member of the National Assembly, and Ambassador, among other roles. I warmly thank the Center of Strategic and International Studies for allowing me to say a few words. It has been almost a month since I took office. I have already exchanged with some of you and meet partners in Nouakchott, Dakar, Washington, and the United Nations. This conversation helped me share the key idea that I would like to share today. This idea, my bottom line, is that the international community must remain engaged in the Sahel. Let me explain. My first argument is that reducing the international footprint in the Sahel right now would amount to recognizing a form of victory for those who leaders and their cooperative partners that want to rupture international partnership. On the contrary, international partners must support even more the countries in the Sahel that are still committed to cooperating with the international community. Wherever possible, you should continue to invest in the different sectors and institutions where you have made a difference of development and security. This includes, of course, the G5, despite its situation. I must also about the financing of humanitarian needs that is more dangerous than ever. For instance, my country's second biggest city is now Mberra, a refugee camp. It has doubled due to the recent violence surge in northern Mali. My second argument is that by staying engaged, we are helping to shape a better future, including the return to democracy and conditions for security and development. Indeed, the current context is now eternal. External and internal constraints will lead us back to a normal situation in the not too distant future. I would also stress that staying engaged in the Sahel and reinforcing your support is the best way to help coastal countries. I hope these few truths will stimulate the panel debate. I wish you fruitful discussion and look forward to meeting many of you in person in the incoming weeks and months. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Meimu. Now we'll have the honor to hear from Ambassador Fee.
Good morning and good afternoon to those of you who are abroad. I want to thank Movember and CSIS for welcoming me here today, and it's wonderful to be with our EU partners. And it's so important that we continue our coordination, not only in Africa, but across the world. So I'm glad to have this chance to discuss with you. Those were really thoughtful comments made by the ambassadors, so let me see if I can add something that moves the conversation forward and addresses some of the issues you raised in November. First, I would like to say that I think it's very important for all of us globally to recognize that democracy as a system of governance is under challenge. So it's clearly under challenge in the Sahel, but it's under challenge elsewhere. And so the ways to solve that challenge are very difficult and very complicated, but require a lot of attention from all of us. And as our friends from the EU have described, they view Sahel and the challenge there as a direct strategic threat to the security of Europe. For the United States, it's not only that our friends in Europe are threatened by instability in the Sahel, but it's first and foremost for the people of the Sahel, as well as our partners in coastal West Africa. It would not be good for any of us if any of the major leaders in West Africa, such as Nigeria, Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, Senegal, also fell vulnerable to these challenges. So that's why I think we really need to work hard together to see if we can find a better path forward in the Sahel. I thought it might be helpful, Mbemba, if I just run through quickly some of the why we think this is happening and then what we might want to do about it. So the why is clearly, in a certain sense, structural. There is, of course, the history and the geography, which make a really big difference in what's possible. And I don't know if everyone acknowledges how difficult it is to govern in these spaces with state boundaries that may not reflect ethnic or other realities of the people and the communities, the history of colonialism, the kind of state structures with a focus on the capital rather than decentralization, and of course, the increasing threat, the environmental threat of climate change. So we're talking about a part of the world which faces real structural challenges. Secondly, we've all seen that since the 1960s and the decolonization movement in Africa, this part of Africa has been very vulnerable to coups before. And we find once you've experienced a coup, sort of, if you will, the glass has been broken, and that vulnerability continues to be a problem. Third, and related to my first point, is poor governance. So it appears that the governance systems are not delivering for the people of the Sahel, and that has contributed to the decision to seize power. There's been a problem in particular with services being provided to folks in those countries. Fourth, there is the immense security pressure and challenge that these governments and populations are facing. Many of our African friends date that to the intervention in Libya, which resulted in the movement of arms and fighters into the Sahel and created a lot of destabilization. So that pressure continues, and it's very hard to govern when you're facing that kind of security threat. I think a fifth problem is disinformation, which is exploited by Russia in particular. I don't think it's a coincidence that much of this is happening in Francophone Africa, and I believe it is very evident that Russia is exploiting the complicated colonial history to advance its own disruptive agenda. Six, I think we should think about why these are coups and not rebellions. Coups suggest to me that there is a component of seizure of power by one faction of an elite to capture the state resources. So there's a very unsavory aspect of this among some. And then I think, as I said, the pattern of coups breaks the glass in terms of that behavior, but I also think we now see that there's been some sort of psychological barrier among the different military leaders, many of whom know each other and are looking to one another, if you will, as peers. So those are some of the factors I think that we have to consider as we develop a better and innovative response to this challenge. So again, we help first and foremost the people of the Sahel who are suffering from terrorist attacks, from poor economic growth, poor governance, lack of access to basic services and education and health, and really not having the opportunities that democracy ideally brings to populations in terms of peace and prosperity. So then we turn to the even harder question, which is what to do about this. I think a lot has been written about the importance of anti-coup norms. Mavemba, I would correct you slightly. We weren't confused about what happened in Niger, for example, but we were trying to be respectful and deferential to our partners, our ECOWAS partners in West Africa, who were working very hard to see if it was possible to reverse this action, to restore the democratically elected President Bazoum, to power. And so we were being respectful of that effort. The second factor in terms of anti-coup norms is what sort of pressure can be brought to bear. And again, for the United States, we have substantial, I'm using Niger as a concrete example here to discuss this. We have substantial economic development and security assistance in Niger. So we're faced with a quandary. We can, as we have, suspend all this assistance, but we acknowledge that it does have an impact on the population. So sometimes it doesn't have an impact where we want it to have on those who seized power irregularly and illegally, but it ends up having an impact on the people who, again, are in a worse situation. To turn to Mali for a moment, I think it's clear to any objective observer that the decision to ask the French to leave, to invite the Wagner Group in, and to delay any progress on a democratic transition has not improved the situation in Mali. In fact, the number of security incidents has surged, the number of civilian casualties has surged, and the economic activity of the country has been deeply suppressed. So in a sense, the choices that are made by coup leaders have not only an effect on them, but an effect on the people. So the way we react is complicated. We do want to be able to invest our resources in a system that can use them appropriately without corruption, with regard to development for the population, but sometimes they really have a hardship effect. Let me give you one example. In December of last year, when we hosted the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, the Millennium Challenge Corporation announced a very important program between Niger and Benin. It was a program to improve the roads and improve the port in Côte. Approximately 40% of the container traffic in Côte reaches Niger. We've had to suspend that program in reaction to the events in Niamey. And that's really regrettable for the peoples of the region. And we would like to be in a position where we can be playing a positive and an affirmative role. And that gets me to my second point in terms of how we can approach this, which we talk a lot, all of us, about how to help the people. And I think there is genuinely an effort underway in this city through the help of many smart and thoughtful people. Our Congress passed a law which developed a new policy called, I always get it wrong because it's such a difficult phrase to say, the strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability. But I might have said it backwards. It might be to promote stability and prevent conflict. And here I might pause to say it's a great idea with a terrible name. So if someone has a better name, they should suggest that to me. But the idea is to look back at the 20 years the United States had been involved in the counterterrorism movement in in the Middle East and South Asia and in parts of Africa, and sort of figure out what went right and what went wrong. And you talked about numbers at the start, Mavemba, where of course the numbers for security assistance were much higher than non-security assistance. So the idea of this strategy is to invest more in people, invest more in governance, invest more in economic development. I really firmly believe, from all of my experience as a diplomat, that that is the appropriate approach and will yield better results, but it's hard to do. In places like the Sahel, for example, where the security situation is difficult, it's hard for people to get out and about and assist others and work with others, and it takes time. So I think we have to be realistic. People want instant answers. It's going to take some time. And a third element, I believe, for what the U.S. and the EU should do together is to continue to work with our partners in Africa, including the regional economic commissions, alliances such as the Sahel Coalition, the African Union, of course, to help them succeed and help them lead for the continent, going back to that idea I mentioned of anti-coup norms. So those are just some thoughts this morning. I hope that's helpful, and thank you for allowing me to be part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our panelists, our speakers, distinguished group that we have here. I think this has framed the rest of our discussion for today. We've heard a spectrum of perspectives, and I think that's what we need. The Sahel is a big place, a lot of issues. All the three ambassadors have addressed them from their perspectives. I'd like to thank you for joining us for this first portion of our meetings, and again invite you to give a round of applause to our distinguished speakers. Thank you very much. This concludes our meeting. our second panel, or the first panel really, after our distinguished speakers' remarks. This is the policy panel where we'll be discussing everything from the policy perspective. We will be joined by three panelists. The first one joining us is Ambassador Emanuela Del Rey, who is the special envoy for the Sahel for the European Union. She's a member of, she was a member of the Parliament of Italy and served as Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs in the government of Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte. The second panelist will be Ambassador Antonio Sanchez Benedito, who is a former who's currently the special envoy for the Sahel for Spain. He has previously served as the European Union head of delegation and ambassador to Mozambique and also to Madagascar, and previously served as Spain's ambassador to Ethiopia, Djibouti, the Seychelles, and to the African Union and IGAD. And the third panelist is Ms. Kamisa Kamara, who is a senior advisor for Africa at the U.S. Institute of Peace. And she previously served as Mali's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of Digital Economy and Planning, and Chief of Staff to the President of Mali. She also had served as a foreign policy advisor to the President of Mali. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Ambassador Claudia Del Rey.
I shall be brief. I would say that the European Union, for the European Union, the most important political principle is governance. And of course, we are putting all our efforts in this major goal that would certainly help solve the problems of the countries of the Sahel, which are absolutely apparent and have been mentioned before. Regarding the European Union, you know that it is the main partner of each country of the Sahel. In my work, I try to keep the dialogue ongoing despite the recent political events, especially in Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali. And I have to say that dialogue for me is the most important element in this moment of crisis. I have to tell you that the European Union is discussing the issue of the Sahel very thoroughly, and I would say 2023 has been dedicated very much to the Sahel, of course, also to the other crises, mainly Ukraine, but definitely the Sahel is probably the dossier that matters the most to the European Union for the reasons we have mentioned. But I would also add not only the fact that the security issues in the Sahel have a direct impact on the European Union. Not only there are migration issues that have to be solved to avoid deaths in the Mediterranean and in the deserts. Not only we need to resolve the situation as regards the conditions of life of millions of Sahelians, but we also have to consider the fact that, in fact, at political level, Africa, and in particular the Sahel, is acquiring more and more significance. I was exploring in the last few days the reactions to the current sad crisis in Israel on the part of the Africans. And if we look at the geography of the 54 countries in the way they reacted, of course, there are very many differences, and each of them has an impact on the general global situation. Not to mention the fact that we have a demographic pressure, which in my view is a positive issue if we manage to really pursue development cooperation in a positive way, by meaning that we can ensure that the populations that in the future will be really sharing our future, especially talking about the European Union, will be educated, will have access to basic services, will be able to participate in the global system as they deserve to participate. So as you can see, the angles in which we analyze, especially the European Union, the Sahel are very many, and we don't want to let it go in a sense, because all the countries of the European Union confirm that despite the difficulties also in the discussions with the countries of the Sahel, we have to remain engaged and also, of course, work better in preparedness, in anticipation, because until now, unfortunately, we have been bound to reactions rather than prevention or, let's say, construction of solid, sustainable solutions for the future of the Sahel. So I would say that for the moment, the good news is that we remain engaged. The bad news is that it's difficult to involve the countries of the Sahel for all the reasons that we have said. And I honestly think that with my modest experience also in the past as Vice Minister and Foreign Affairs and as a diplomat now, I would say that the only way by which we can really solve the problems at the moment is not only by giving consistent economic support for projects that are result-based. And this has to be done constantly and guaranteed to the countries of the Sahel, but also by including them more in our discussions, because I think that by inclusion we can contrast disinformation, we can contrast the malicious objectives of external actors that do not have any intention of ameliorating the situation of the countries of the Sahel. And of course, we can guarantee that we build a solid partnership which is already there but needs to be implemented in a better way. Of course, much more could be said, but I think that politically this is the most important thing. And I'm very proud of the fact that the countries of the European Union are all together saying that we must remain engaged. And of course, to find new ways, review our policy, but in the perspective of continuing to be the main partner of the countries of the Sahel. In the more general framework of the global affairs, because as I said, Africa is more and more a fundamental actor in all the dynamics in the world. If you look, as I said, at today's events, sad events in Israel and Palestine, the very serious issues, you see that the weight of the position of African countries will have an important significance. In the countries of the Sahel, for instance, I've been reading the press, and I can tell you that it is quite interesting to see that there is a lot of influence, for instance, from Russia in the way the facts are interpreted, which means that we have to be more present, not less present. We have to be much more present and indulge in much more profound discussions and work hand by hand to build a common future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Emanuela Claudia Del Rey. We appreciate your comment. From that, we take that the good news is that the EU will continue to be engaged, but it's obvious that this is a fluid and dynamic situation. We will revisit this topic during the Q&A. Ambassador Sanchez Benedito, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks so much, the director. I guess this is working fine. Thank you. Thanks so much for the introduction, for your nice words, for the invitation to participate at this fourth transatlantic dialogue dedicated to the Sahel at the moment when all the international attention, and rightly so, is focused on Israel and the terrorist attacks of Hamas and the war of aggression in Ukraine. But it's important to sit back, to reflect, to take a stock of the situation in the Sahel that is the other major crisis and one of the fastest growing humanitarian crises in the world. For us, envoys is not always easy to see the forest for the trees. We are always jumping from one crisis to the other, and that's why it's important to have this common reflection, and so that we can come to some conclusions to move forward with a collective response. After the ambassadors, Lambrinidis and Cabanas and Assistant Secretary Molifi, my colleague Manuela Del Rey, they have very well set the scene. I would like to stress a couple of ideas. The first one is that the Sahel is a story of a collective failure. For the last 10 years, since the rebellion in the north of Mali and the French intervention that put the Sahel on the map geopolitically, since then all the indicators are in the red. Since then the different terrorist organizations have been spreading, have been forming coalitions with criminal organizations whose only federating element is the participation in the profits of a very lucrative business of trafficking of persons, trafficking of drugs, trafficking of weapons. Since then, Libya continues, especially the south of Libya, continues to be a sanctuary where all those trafficking take place. Since then, there's been a spillover effect of that instability to the south, especially to the coastal Gulf of Guinea states. For all these years, as well, the socioeconomic indicators are very negative, and poverty is being spreading. It is a collective failure because, in a sense, the Sahel is being a laboratory of different initiatives. For the African Union, it's being a test for their capacity to implement an architecture on peace and security in Africa, and to deploy a standby force that has never taken shape. For ECOWAS, they've been trying to mediate and implement transition processes to respond to all this succession of coups and ruptures of the constitutional orders that have already been mentioned without much success. Lately, Captain Traoré in Burkina Faso, for instance, said that elections weren't a priority. For Burkina and Mali, they are also dragging their feet, and Niger, which is a litmus test for that capacity. Bazoum is still a legitimate president. Bazoum is still kidnapped in his own residence in Niamey. For United Nations and MINUSMA, who was one of the biggest and most complex missions deployed in the world, where they are leaving the country in a rush. They're leaving behind camps and equipment and facilities that are being taken over. They are fighting to take them over. The government, the Malian armed forces with support of Wagner and Russia. And on the other hand, the Tuaregs and the terrorists are trying to get all that equipment. And so far, the forces are quite balanced, and this is going to be a very protracted conflict. For all these years, the European Union has deployed an array of different CSDP, common security and defense policy initiatives, training missions, and to reinforce the capacities, and that hasn't prevented the coups and the governance crisis. For all those years, first with the Operation Serval, then with the Operation Barkhane, that had limited success in neutralizing the heads or the leaders of the terrorist groups, but didn't really address the root causes and of the terrorist phenomenon. So a collective failure. I said I wouldn't like to fall into the trap or considering that this is the partner's failure, because I think that would be contradictory with the Africans' own and legitimate aspiration to be the masters and of their own present, and it goes contrary to the idea of having a truly a partnership among equals. I think the situation is first and foremost a responsibility of the Africans themselves. But we can also say that perhaps that partnership hasn't really delivered. What's even more preoccupying, the African population, they are taking us, the partners, as sort of accomplices for that failure that explains those movements under the flag of Pan-Africanism and Sankarism, after the name of the first captain, Sankara, in Burkina Faso. that are putting into question that partnership and the capacity to deliver and to take care of or cater for the real necessities of the population. So what to do? That's what we are trying to reflect collectively, because something needs to be done. In the face of this situation, business as usual is not the right answer. And that's the reflection that we are trying to promote, taking advantage of the rotating presidency of the European Council. Spain, we are very close to the situation. We are an old and at the same time sort of a new actor in the region. Until recently, we didn't have the capacity that we have now, but we have it now. And we have a capacity to talk to everybody and to try and build a consensus. One thing I think we all agree is that more presence is needed, that we can't abandon just the region, recognize our failure, recognize our defeat, because first of all, we would create conditions for other actors. I'm thinking about Russia, of course, with a different agenda, an agenda that is about undermining the West, that is about taking control of strategic resources, and it's about promoting a different kind of governance that doesn't have democracy and human rights at the center of its preoccupations, but also because we have a commitment with the populations, and they need the assistance, but also because we need to communicate better. But for that, we need results. We need better stories, and that's what we are trying to do. We need, on the one hand, a quick impact, projects that can be presented to the public opinions in Africa and in the Sahel. On the other hand, we also need to have a longer view, a strategic vision for the Sahel. And one last comment about the importance of the Sahel. It's been said that the 21st century is going to be shaped by Africa because of the demographic explosion. By the end of the century, 1 in 3 world population will be African, and this demographic boom is nowhere higher than in the Sahel. So there is a possible demographic dividend to be reaped, but it will depend on the kind of policies and measures that are taken now. Secondly, because of this emergence of Africa as a truly global actor on the international scene. One example is its admission at the G20. Another is their legitimate aspiration to have a permanent seat at the UN Security Council. And it's about their capacity to handle and to strike efficient partnerships with the rest of the world that will confirm those objectives. Then in terms also of climate change and in terms of the fragility of the whole region. So again, let me just stress once again the importance of the region, our collective commitment, and the importance not to be discouraged by such a difficult situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Sanchez Benedito. From your comments, we retain a couple ideas. One is the collective failure. I think that's key because often we don't always look at it as a collective failure. The failure of the peace and security architecture, but also the challenges of insisting on a constitutional order that may not have even been there before. I see from you and from Ambassador Del Rey, there's a lot of insistence on election and democracy, but we know elections alone don't cause democracy. It's just something we'll revisit also. Madame Kamisa Kamara, on to you. Thank you.
Bonjour à tous. Thank you to Mvemba and to CSIS for allowing me to participate in this very important discussion. And I would like to thank the previous distinguished panelists for their remarks. As you may know, I worked for the best elected president in the history of Mali. President Keita was first elected with over 77% of the votes in 2013, and then he was reelected in 2018. And Malians did believe that he was the right person to face the jihadist insurgency, to reconcile Malians, and to put Mali back on track to development, and also for Mali to regain its credibility on the international scene. I was also his chief of staff when the coup of August 2020 happened. So I was a witness to the crisis that led to the overthrow of the best elected president in the history of Mali. So the point that I would like to make, the first one, and Mvemba, please allow me to be politically incorrect here. I think we need to change our frame of reference and our frame of thinking about what a military coup is. And Mvemba, you did say in your introductory remarks that a coup is a coup. Well, a coup is a coup, but what is a coup not, or what is not a coup, or what is it that we need to look at when we look at coups and think, well, this is not what a coup really is. First of all, I think we really need to get out of our comfort zone. I do not believe that a coup, especially in the Sahel region, is an attack against democracy. A coup is not 20, 30 million citizens of the Sahel telling the West, we do not like democracy, we hate it, and this is what we want. A coup is an issue with the military leaders who actually took over and toppled a civilian elected leader. These military leaders are absent from all of the discussions we've been having about military coups in the Sahel for the past 10 plus years. Why is that? Maybe we need to look at why they took over in those coups, what led them to decide to topple a civilian leader, and why are the population applauding them? Usually it is because the citizens of those countries are looking for hope. They believe that their elected civilians have lost their legitimacy, and the military leaders who are taking over, and whether that is true or not, are perceived to have fought in the fight against terrorism, are more legitimate actors than their civilian leaders. So maybe we need to include now those military leaders into our discussion and figure out what is it that drives them to conduct coups. The second remotely linked point that I would like to make is the issue of sanctions. The ECOWAS has imposed very heavy sanctions against the military leaders of Mali. They have threatened sanctions against Guinea. They have not imposed any sanctions against Burkina Faso. Well, despite the sanctions in Mali, the military junta has survived. And I should even say that sanctions have been worn as a badge of honor by these military leaders, who are saying that, well, the mean old West is imposing sanctions against us. Look at what they're doing to us and look at what we are offering to you. And usually these are being used through modern communication tools. And I have to say, these military leaders are more skilled than all of us at using the modern communication tools. So maybe we also should look at that. The third point that I would like to make is about the regional organizations that are supposed to be fighting or deterring those coups. We're looking at the ECOWAS, and some of you have mentioned earlier that the ECOWAS was supposed to be the leader in reversing the military coup in Niger, and I agree. And I agree with the U.S. approach of letting the ECOWAS demonstrate its might, demonstrate its muscles. Clearly, the main issue of the ECOWAS is its heads of states. And what is happening is that the domestic limitations that these heads of states have are then transposed into the regional organization ECOWAS, and makes it a very ineffective organization when it comes to deterring coups. The situation in the Sahel has has changed quite a lot over the past 10 years. Neither are international tools, neither the regional tools are adapted to face this rapidly changing environment and volatile environment. And I do feel that we should not miss our target. And we have been missing our target all along. It is not an attack against democracy. The issue is with the very military leaders that we are talking about, but we're not including in our discussion. And the third is really these regional organizations, including the ECOWAS, that look very good on paper, and they have had some successes in the past, but their tools as of today are not adapted. They're not fit to face the rapidly changing situation of the Sahel. And maybe our discussion and the way we think about these issues need to revolve around these 3 points. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kamisa. From your comment, we retain that 70% of, over 70% of Malians had voted for IBK, that we need to change our framework and how we approach these issues, and that a coup is not always a rebellion against or revolt against democracy. On that point, I think that probably rejoins what I said earlier. Then we need to really invest in democracy, right? And investing in democracy is beyond elections, is investing in institutions, particularly in governance, because eventually people need to see services and all the expectations, at least trying to translate them into reality. And then sanctions don't always seem to work. Now that you described that, the psychology of it is such as military leaders wear this as a badge of honor. Regional organizations having their own shortcomings, we know those, and pushing them forward to be the lead is not always the most effective way either. So with that, I think in the interest of time, I'll waive my chair's prerogative and turn straight to questions, starting with the audience. Your hand, I cannot see. Oh, okay, the mic, sorry. So we have a microphone in the back for any person who wants to ask a question. While people in the room decide if they want to ask questions, I will start with one from our participant or people guests online. How can the Sahelian youth's voices be amplified as key stakeholders of security and development? Sorry. So I'll start with the questions from our audience online. The first one is, how can the Sahelian youth's voices be amplified as key stakeholders of security and development? And the second question is, how can the EU improve its immigration policies on Africa to minimize brain drain from Africa? Any one of you can take any one of these questions. Ambassador Sanchez Benedito, any question that you want to answer?
Let me start by the second one, and perhaps tapping on our own experience as a long partnership in terms of migration between Spain and the countries in the region. I remember quite well when the first big crisis in the early 2000 years, in 2005, 2006, when we really didn't have the tools and the mechanisms to deal with such a phenomenon of those proportions. There were a few things that we learned along the way. The first one is that this is a collective effort where you have to get the countries of origin, the transit and destination together, sharing the same objective. Secondly, you have to invest on the ground and look at the root causes of immigration. Third, you need to offer prosper opportunities, and so that there is really a win-win situation. There is a clear complementarity between an aging continent, Europe, and African youth. So the whole idea of taking advantage of the opportunities offered by a well managed and efficient migratory flows, and while at the same time we put the dignity of the persons at the center of all our concerns, we are combating the illegal trafficking. Brain drain is a real problem, and best way to combat it is by creating opportunities in their countries of origin where that talent can be used for the benefit of their own countries, for the benefit of Africa.
Thank you, Ambassador. Madame
Yes.
Camara or Ambassador Del Rey? Who goes first?
I don't know.
Go ahead, Ambassador Del Rey.
Okay. Well, I will give an answer that includes all aspects of what has been mentioned, starting from civil society, because in general, I would say that the youth, women, and in general civil society is one of the major agents of change of the societies in the Sahel. And I have to say that the opportunity that are given to civil society in the region are very, very little. And we are also culpable of this, and we don't pay enough attention to the importance of these agents of change. And I have to say also that unfortunately this doesn't allow a proper development of the formidable human capital that we find in the Sahel. And this is something that is really requires an urgent response, because if we continue to waste time and we don't focus enough on civil society, offering civil society in general, from students to activists to of course, NGOs and others who are involved in social issues and opportunity, we are missing a very important occasion to change things in the region. Regarding youth, I always say that despite the fact that the youth often possesses a mobile phone, this doesn't mean that they are actually really participating in the global debate. And this, of course, for them, it's an immense problem. And it is an immense problem for us, because we need them to be part of the global debate. And going to migration, of course, we all want migration to be legal. To allow people to move legally in a safe way to avoid deaths in the Mediterranean and in the deserts. And we also want to give opportunities to people in the countries of origin to develop their own skills in their own countries to ameliorate their own life and also the life of their societies. Everything is connected. It's a vicious cycle if we think about it, because unless we give opportunities, we don't solve the problem of illegal migration, and especially we don't tackle the problem of trafficking of human beings, which is a real plague of our century, and it's absolutely something we have to fight against. Let me just conclude by saying that I really praise the countries of Africa in general and the countries of the Sahel in particular, because when we think about migration, of course, the European Union looks at migration with its own perspective. But we also have to see the perspective of the countries of Africa, because most of the migrations are south-south, and we know that they really make huge efforts to face the phenomenon, and I think that they really have to be praised, because the number of refugees, the number of IDPs, the number of migrants that are crossing the region are so many. And the countries of the Sahel are making such wonderful efforts to face the situation that I think we should learn from them also what they are trying to develop as policies. And this is why I think that in this moment in which the European Union is really reflecting very deeply on the issue of migration, we have to take the opportunity to work with our partners in the Sahel to create even stronger partnership in the field of migration, because we can share experiences, and especially we can learn from each other in terms of potential solutions. This is something that I think is developing, so I give you another good news. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Emanuela Del Rey. Madame Camara.
It's very difficult to add to anything that was said already. Okay. Maybe on the youth voices, I think they are inserting themselves in the debate and without even being invited. I see them on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook. They do participate sometimes online, but also on TV programs in their own countries. They're very courageous voices, and they do participate in at least the domestic debates that are happening around the issues that we've discussed earlier today. But they also want and have positioned themselves to be the voices of the youth on the international stage. So they're very vocal, and they're out there. I can, cite and give you at least 10 names that come to mind as of now.
Thank you very much. We have 3 questions left. I want to read them. We have only about 4 minutes left. You have the choice of one of the questions, or either one, but you only have 30 seconds to tackle them in the interest of time. So the first one is, I agree that a coup is not always a coup, and an election doesn't always represent democracy. Clearly, this was the case in Gabon. How should the US adapt? You mentioned collective failure, human trafficking, drugs, and weapons. Who is supplying the weapons? The last one, there is a lot of emphasis on what the US and EU need to do. What are the Africans as a whole willing to do, and what necessary changes will they make? As the African on the panel, Kamisa, I'll put you on the spot if you can handle that one. And go ahead, you can start. Thanks.
Yes, and it's the most difficult one of all questions, so thank you for challenging me here. Yes, there is a lot of emphasis on what the US and the EU need to do, because they have been considered the main partners of these countries. And when looking at what Africans need to do, first of all, I think what we've been missing, or what it's been difficult for us to hear, is Africans deciding who they want to partner with. They have said that they want to have Russia, the Russian Federation as a country, but also the Wagner Group. And we keep telling them that this is not the right choice for them to make. We have made the same grandstanding statement when China was very involved in the infrastructure building in Africa, and it has continued, it has not stopped. Well, Africans have chosen that China was the best partner for them when it comes to infrastructure development, and it has worked for them. And we do not see what I put myself in the international community here, but we do not seem to want to even listen to what Africans want. So to me, what Africans need to do is, first of all, and I'm going to be repeating myself, is fix their regional organization. The ECOWAS needs to be reformed. And if civil society organizations in West Africa can do something, is really put the pressure on the ECOWAS leaders to reform the organization and make it an organization of the people of West Africa, but also make it an effective organization that can bring stability and economic development to the region. The second point that I would like to make is for Africans to continue to advocate to the West that they need to choose who they believe is the best partner for them. I do not often agree with the choices that are made, but I do agree that these countries have agency to choose who they want to partner with. More than 30 seconds, sorry.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be the negotiator here. So I think Ambassador Sanchez Benedito, you will take the collective failure question because you brought that up. So words have consequences. And then we'll end with Ambassador Del Rey.
Absolutely, but I was insisting on these ideas not to fall into this trap to really blame us partners on on everything that's happening on Africa. That's not respectful with the Africans themselves, not about this idea that we need to have a true partnership among or between equals. Let me also come back to the idea of a coup. All coups are equal, but some coups are more coup than others. No, we could say they all have a history behind, and in the same way as democracy, they don't grow out of nowhere. No, you need a fertile ground for it to prosper. And perhaps our mistake has been not to really to understand and to take into consideration the circumstances of each country, and trying to reproduce a multi-party system where sometimes the parties in Africa, and some African countries, are still very young, with young institutions, young as states, not as nations. They are older than others. They don't respond to a specific programs, but they are based on a more ethnic and community-driven situations, and that's what we need to understand. So that's why we need to show realism when dealing with this kind of situation, and have a tailor-made response for each specific case, not trying to just preach on what they have to do and what kind of democracy we partners want for them, instead of listening to them and trying to support their own way and aspirations.
Okay. Thank you very much. Ambassador Del Rey, about 30 seconds,
yes.
So we can close this session.
30 seconds is too little. I will share full concepts. Regarding failure, I don't think we should talk about failure, because many things have advanced, many projects have been successful. We have been doing a lot in terms of humanitarian aid. So failure in the sense that we cannot say that we have obtained the stability we aspire to. Nevertheless, things have been going on, and I have to say that the mere fact that we have a strong partnership in place, for me, is a big success, because it wasn't the case only a few years ago. So now we are partners, and I think that this is a very good basis for the future. And in this sense, when you ask what the European Union should do, I reply by saying what I've already said. First of all, deliver. The European Union should deliver as much as possible, and of course include as much as possible. And when my friend Camara was saying that the youth is vocal in the countries of the Sahel, unfortunately it is not vocal. This voice doesn't reach the countries of the European Union, for instance, and this is why I was saying we need to give them more opportunities. Of course, the other thing that the European Union must do is dialogue. And of course, we are very worried and shocked in some cases by the coup d'etat and the fact that transitions are not proceeding as we would like them to proceed. Nevertheless, we cannot interrupt the dialogue. We must keep the discussion ongoing in view of course, democracy. But what kind of democracy? I agree on the discussion ongoing in the Sahel on the concept of democracy, how to obtain democracy. First of all, I think that elections are necessary, but they are a process. They are not just a goal. And therefore, we have to focus very much on the process, and the European Union is supporting the electoral process, because it believes that it is important to concentrate on the development of structures for the elections. And this is my personal idea, and of course I try to promote it since a long time. I think that when we talk about democracy in the Sahel, we have to talk about a contextualized democracy. Of course, democratic structures are universal, but the declination of the structures can be adapted to local needs and local interpretations, because, of course, the countries of the Sahel present human geography and, of course, also political history and ideological history, and at the moment also geopolitical situation to which the democratic structures that we aim at constructing through our governance aid, as well well as, of course, our partnership with them, will be able to will be able to be the result. So this is my conclusion remarks as regards the fact that we have to include more the African leaders and the African countries in our project and prospects for the future.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Manuela Claudia Del Rey. On this note, I'd like to thank our panelists, starting with Ambassador Sanchez Benedito, Madame Camisa Camara, as well as Ambassador Emanuela Claudia Del Rey. This concludes our session. Please join me with a round of thankful applauses for our panelists. So welcome back. It's a pleasure to have you for this last session of this dialogues. We will be discussing everything else that has not been discussed. So we call this the civil society panel because it really encompasses everything else. I'm joined and happy to welcome three great panelists, as distinguished as those who went before us, starting with Ambassador Ramayad, who is the Senior Director of the Atlantic Council's Africa Center and Senior Fellow for the Europe Center. And she has been working in the space, foreign affairs space for a long time, having worked in French, European, and international politics. She has served as France's Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and Human Rights, and the first ever French Minister of Human Rights and the first woman of African descent to become a member of the French cabinet. Donna Charles is Director of West Africa and Sahel in the Africa Center at the U.S. Institute of Peace. She previously served as a professional staff member for the U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee, where she handled the Africa and UN peacekeeping portfolios for the then Chairman Gregory Meeks. Prior to that assignment, Ms. Charles spent almost a decade at the State Department, where she covered African affairs, policy, counterterrorism, sanctions, and diplomatic security. And Ms. Doussouba Konate, who's the Country Director of Accountability Lab, Mali. And she has had several years of experience in international development. She oversaw program implementation at Accountability Lab Global in Mali, Niger, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Guinea-Bissau. She works closely with teams to improve the implementation of programs that focus on governance in these network labs. So welcome, ladies, and it's all ladies. We will have each 5 minutes to make our statement, and we'll start in the order in which you were introduced. So Ambassador Yad.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this invitation. I'm really honored to be a part of this important meeting. Thank you, CSIS and the European Union delegation. I'm happy to talk about this very important topic related to the Sahelian issues, knowing everything's going on there. So I will try to open this conversation by focusing on the regions of the recent coup in West Africa and even more. And maybe try to figure out what are the next scenarios. So as you know, very recently the continent and especially the West African zone has experienced coup. I don't know how we can count them right now, 8 in 3 years, but knowing that several happened in the same country, like Mali and Burkina Faso, for example, it's maybe more than that. The coup in Niger in July 26 seemed to be very special and a turning point, though. Africans and their Western partners have seemed surprised by the events in Niger. Not surprised about what happened in Mali, in Burkina Faso, but Niger seemed to be the last frontier of something. Democracy, fight against jihadist movements, development issues, it's a lot, global competition powers, a lot is on the line when it comes to Niger in a very unexpected way. And the consequences were a bit unusual too and unique. The ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, under Nigerian President Bola Tinubu leadership, threatened to use force if the coup leaders don't restore the former constitutional order, including the current president of Niger, Mohamed Bazoum, they gave a deadline, August 6, and announced sanctions. And as you can see, there was no military intervention because of a big pressure coming from Nigeria itself and the neighbors. This unusual firm answer can be explained by several reasons, though. And those reasons are still out there. The first one is there is a fear that the region collapses. Let's take just the G5 Sahel, a regional group of countries promoting development and security. It is led by 4 juntas, G5, 4 juntas. Among the 5 members, Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, and Chad have recently experienced an undemocratic transition. Mauritania remains. Niger is the 5th to have a coup. The second reason is that despite the sanctions all these countries experience, the regional coup leaders seem to taunt the African organizations and the so-called international community. And there is something related to a test of credibility here. And the third reason of this firm reaction is maybe related to Nigeria. Nigeria and its new president, Bola Tinubu, recently, who just assumed the presidential office 2 months before. So since then, another coup happened, a bit different from the others, in Gabon, but it's still a coup. And the reasons of this coup, according to me, are first, maybe the easy way the others happened. In a few days, without any strong protest, or despite the strong protests, they just happened. So why not another one? It may have encouraged the military to try for Gabon, for example. There's also the continued deterioration of security, of security. You know, these countries are facing jihadist threats and attacks from the Islamic State, from Al-Qaeda, and these threats have fueled the recent coup. It's not new. It's on since 2012 in Mali, starting in Mali, and then spread to Burkina Faso, Niger, in 15. But Gabon is not a Sahelian country, and Gabon, there's no jihadist in Gabon, and it's not a poor state. It's oil rich country. So according to me, it's bigger than, and it was already, but it's much bigger than only the jihadist pressure. It's about bad governance, mostly. That's what all these countries have in common. And even Niger. Niger has, of course, President Bazoum, it's a democratic country, but Niger has domestic challenges in terms of governance. It has experienced 4 coups since its independence in 1960. So we have to see things on the long run and not only the recent events. It has a history here, and Niger including. Except Sudan, all this happened in ex-French colonies, like 2/3 of coups in Africa since 1990. Why? And that's maybe what is the main cause, bad governance in ex-French colonies. People are hungry for change, no matter how. That's what we have here. Even if we have to do it through a military power, it's a change. Look, the Gabonese government has been a family power for 56 years, and there's no democratic opposition who succeeded in changing that. So people are hungry for change. Democracy was not enough to obtain that change. So why not a coup? Because it will be a reset, at least a reset. And all these matter around democracy is important. The question about democracy is important. Because I'm not sure that what have been presented to Africans was really democracy because of the double standards. The double standards have hurt a lot the democratic idea. And I think that if people don't want that, reject or don't support this, it's not about democracy. It's about the idea of democracy that have been presented to them. It's totally different. And I think it's not fair to say that Africans don't like democracy or don't want democracy. They are only fit for a military rule or power. There's no people in the world or in the humankind that has to live under a military or authoritarian regime. They also want democracy. But the democracy we present to them should be real democracy, not a fake democracy, because an important part of the international community have backed these authoritarian regimes for years. Before the coup in Gabon, there was an election, presidential election. Nobody said anything about that presidential election, despite the fact that the journalists were not allowed to cover the election. The internet was cut in the country. Nobody said anything. And the renewed president was about to go to New York and attend the UN General Assembly, like usual, as usual, for decades before him, his father. So that's what Africans don't want. They want real democracy, the same standard as the others. And that is the core of all this. Beyond, and of course we have the failures in terms of development, because the assistance, the aid, the development, it did not work. People live under poverty. So they are hungry for food and for change. So I'm going to stop there and open to the discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Yad. From your comments, we think that there's a test of credibility. Continued insecurity, of course, is one reason that coups happen, but mostly using the case of Gabon as an example, it's mostly about bad governance. So the lack of good governance and also the double standards that have been applied when we assess democracy. Africans not wanting fake democracies, but really wanting the same standards that we find around the world. We'll go to you, Donna Charles. Thank you again for joining us. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity. And I will keep my remarks brief to ensure that Ms. Konate has ample opportunity to engage as well. But first, let me strongly associate myself with the remarks and commentary from Ambassador Yad. I could not agree more. What people in the region, especially the countries that are experiencing these anti-democratic shocks, if you will, is what we're experiencing, what we're seeing is the urgent need for change, and that the kind of democracy that they deserve is not the one that has been on offer for years, if not decades. And so I associate myself with those remarks, and I think it's a very important thread to pull in this discussion. And I appreciate that all of the previous speakers have gone through, great detail in terms of what has gone on country by country, and the important emphasis on the fact that while, we're seeing a general trend of coups and anti-democratic movements popping up throughout the region, there are differences as well. There are similarities, of course, but there are important differences to touch on. But at the end of the day, this kind of push toward an anti-democratic movement, a coup, extra constitutional change in government, overall is extremely dangerous. We're in a very dangerous time, and I cannot emphasize that enough. And the reason I believe it's dangerous is, multiple reasons for that. The first is that the message that is being sent to others who aspire to the same position or perch is that all you really have to do is ensure that you have the guns, that you hold a head of state or several members of the cabinet hostage, and just wait the situation out. And that is a very concerning message, because what we're doing is acquiescing, if you will, to this idea that if change needs to happen, that it's easier to go through this route of force than to insert yourself in the democratic process, to allow your voice to be heard in the way that many other political candidates and opposition parties, time immemorial, have done. Have said, I am going to put myself forward as a candidate and show the people that I can provide that change, or I am going to try to provide that change that they are looking for. Nope, that's too hard. So what we're going to do is take our guns and we'll do it by force. I understand, I think it's very important for people to understand that many of us in civil society, NGOs, international organizations, and the US government, I don't want to speak for them, we realize that the democracies that we're seeing aren't perfect. United States, our democracy isn't perfect. I think anybody who's been paying attention for several years now will acknowledge that fact. Democracy is hard. As a franchise, it is not easy. It is not meant to be easy. But it is meant to put forward to the people a social contract, a contract that basically says, we as the government will do our part. We'll provide services, we'll provide protection, we'll do what we need to do, what we are supposed to do to ensure that you can live your life and build a future and provide to society. On the other end of the contract is the citizen. And the citizen says, I will engage in this franchise. I will exercise my civic responsibility. I will do what I can to ensure that my voice is heard about the leadership that I think is representative of me and my community. Okay? When these pushes, when the juntas come into play, they're basically saying, you know what? We don't trust you. We don't trust you to make that decision. And I go back to Ambassador Yad's point about, whether or not democracy is credible and genuine, because that, I think, is the crux of this entire discussion. When you have a system where the elites, the urbanized elites, are the ones who have access to the democratic franchise, and the people in the hinterland are left to just fend for themselves and deal with whatever they have to deal with, then you have to ask yourself, is this franchise of democracy equitable? Is there access for everybody? Does everybody understand what this social contract is, what it's supposed to be? Or do we have a lopsided approach to that? And there are a number of infrastructure issues that need to be addressed, because it's one thing to have elections. It's another thing to have a system in place, the infrastructure in place to follow through on all of those elements that were used as the campaign platform. So I say all this to emphasize Ambassador Yad's point, which I think is so important, that the African citizens who are experiencing these military coups are no less entitled to the franchise of democracy, of true democracy, than anybody else in the world. I think that is such an important point. What we're seeing in many parts of sub-Saharan Africa is this idea that, well, it's Africa, so it's okay. No, it's not. It's dangerous, and it sends a message that force is the way to implement change. When in reality, there are so many peace builders, there are so many grassroots constituents on the ground who have been doing the work. They have not been adequately resourced to ensure that that change comes through the ballot box, that change comes through community-driven engagement, to ensure that there is connective tissue between the people out in the hinterland and the people in the capital. And that is what I think we as civil society actors, we as non-governmental organizations, we as the international community, it's our responsibility to help that process, to ensure that we provide the supports necessary. Because when you tell a group of people that this is okay for you, but not okay for others, then we lose that trust and credibility as well. And that, I think, will be a detriment for the type of work that not only the U.S. Institute of Peace, but many other actors throughout this space are doing on a day-to-day basis. So I will leave my comments there and turn it over for additional commentary and remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Donna. We hear you about bad democracy, a system that is not equitable, that leads to people with guns feeling that they may as well just take it over. And the double standards, again, using different yardsticks for different parts of the world. And eventually, all this is wrapped in the failure of the social contract. We'll revisit during Q&A. Madame Doussouba Konate, please, 5 minutes.
Thank you so much for having me. I will try to do that in 5 minutes. It's pretty tough, but I will do my best. What an interesting conversation. We all know, and again, I'm not going to go back to the history of military coup, but I think that one point that is really, that for me that is really important is, yes, the military coup are a threat to democracy. But let's not forget that these military coups are also supported by a large part of the population for the simple reason because that backsliding of democracy started way before this epidemic of coup started in the region. I think that we are all aware of the various problems that exist in the region, which are extremely complex. There is obviously the lack of good governance that I come back several times from the previous panelist, and I think it's such a cross-cutting theme. It's definitely a problem that has way too many consequences. I'm just going to name a few because I think it's really key. But for example, one of the consequences is the absence of strong independent institution that is giving way to electoral fraud. We have seen that in so many different countries in the Sahel. We have seen that in Mali lately, for example, which led to in 2020 to really just extensive protest where every Friday after the prayer, you had thousands and thousands of people that were gathering in downtown of Bamako protesting about the manipulation that the government was doing. I think that another consequence is really the access to fair and transparent justice. Me that is working on the ground, we talk to a lot of people, we do a lot of survey, we exchange with them, and justice is often seen as one of the most corrupt public sector. Even though there has been a lot of effort that have been made in the past, unfortunately, that leads to a lot of impunity. And again, this is definitely an issue. When I'm talking about impunity, I'm talking obviously about corruption. And when I talk about corruption, I want to talk about the fact that there is really a lack or poor redistribution of resources, resulting in poor provision of basic social needs. People do not have access to electricity. They don't have access to health. They don't have access to infrastructure. They don't have access to education. That can only lead to so many different issues. Obviously, insecurity is a consequences also of bad governance. We have a multiplication of actors, whether it's armed group, terrorist group, self-defense group, just to name a few, who are on the ground with different interests, different agenda, and they are using really the grievance of the population to actually recruit and gain a greater influence. Another point that I want to mention that I think that is really important that I have been also, I think, mentioned to one of my previous panelists is also the role of social network. I just want to highlight the fact that when we talk about the role of social network, of social media, we tend to talk a lot about the misinformation, the disinformation, and the manipulation that is coming from Russia. But it's not only it, it's also access to information. And right now, with that new revolution, that new technology, people have access to information. And what we're noticing is really the rise of new web activists that look like me, that are African, that can speak French, that can speak English, that can speak the national languages in a clear and understanding way. And they have that power to actually reach out to thousands of people in the region. And this is something that is really important. And I think that just in terms of what can we do about that, in terms of civil society leaders, actors, young African, just to come back on that idea of the importance of social media, there is that importance of the narrative. What is the narrative that we want as African people regarding what is happening in our continent or in the Sahel region, just in general? And the question that I always ask myself is, how can we empower an entire country if we do not focus also on the positive, on the strengths that we have, on what we can bring also to the table? I think that just shows how important it is for us to have a seat at the table. And I just want to congratulate you guys, the CSIS team, for the diversity of the people that are here in this panel, because I think that we're all aware of the fact that a few years ago, whenever you had like a meeting on the Sahel, you will see that most of the people that were present were actually people from the West. So that's what I'm saying, that we as African people, we need to have a seat at a table. We need to be heard. We need to be listened. We need to be able to voice our concern. Really, again, congratulations for that. I think that another point that is really important is obviously the policies that are put in place. I think that dialogue and keeping on the conversation is key. It's really sad to see that every time that somebody from the French government or somebody from the Malian government or the Burkina Faso government take a stand, it actually transforms itself into a diplomatic crisis or to some sort of punishment, to making sure that people can have their say. And it's becoming like a power battle. And unfortunately, who is being the victim of that diplomatic crisis is actually the population. You mentioned in your introduction the fact that a few people, the student from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, they cannot have a visa to actually study abroad, and there's a lot of consequences. So definitely, this is something that we need to think about, and it's definitely clear that isolating the leader currently doesn't help the situation. I really love the comment of Kamisa Kamara saying that we actually need to think about the fact that we might need to involve those leaders, even though they're not legitimate. We might need to involve them in the discussion. We need to involve them because they are the one representing the country of the Sahel, but also because of the credibility that the population right now is actually giving them. And I think that they have done something that is being applauded on the entire continent, which is actually taking a stand for themselves, being able to have a frank, honest discussion, sometimes harsh discussion with the former colonial power. But I cannot tell you every time that Mr. Abdoulaye Diop is actually talking about the foreign policy of the country, how many messages I'm receiving in terms of congratulation and how proud people are to have somebody who's actually standing for himself and standing for like the country that he's representing. And I think my last point is really about the strength that the Sahel has, which is the youth. And I cannot stress that enough. We need to make sure that we put in place processes to make sure that we amplify the voice of youth. I'm saying youth because if we take a look at most of the people that are part of those terrorist group, armed group in the center and northern part of Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Niger, a lot of them are youth. And they are part of this group because they lack opportunities. So there's really a necessity for the government in place, for the different cooperation that can happen within other countries, such as European countries, to make sure that we put in place policies to the benefit of the youth, making sure that they can really, that they can be proactive, that they can be proactive also, and that they can be included. And right now, a lot of them, they don't feel included. They don't think that they have access to opportunities, which actually leads to more corruption. A lot of people will say, okay, I just want to be part of the government so that I can have also my piece of cake. A lot of people actually want to go abroad through regular or through irregular migration, which is definitely not helping the country. And I think that there is really, again, that necessity to put in place policies in favor of the youth, because a lot of them have nothing to lose. I'm going to stop right here, but thank you so much. Looking forward to the questions.
Thank you very much, Dussuba. A lot of stuff there. I'll just flesh out a few things that were not mentioned previously. So you talked about the strengthening of electoral bodies to avoid fraud. You talked about the absence of transparent justice, which feeds impunity and corruption. The inequitable distribution of resources, of course, that fuels public discontent. The role of social media, and not just what we seem to be obsessed with in the West, which is misinformation, and so on, but actually access to information, which itself gives people more power. And then the role that these military leaders should play as we move forward. We have a few minutes. I'm going to this time take my chair's prerogative and ask you, all three of you, this one question, because that's how we started this day, is how do we move forward? Dussuba, I'll start with you because you're on the ground there. There's a lot of acrimony about coups. There's a lot of, the discussion is lost, as far as I'm concerned. So today, all our distinguished guests talked about partnership and working together, and we're all in this together. Ambassador Sanchez Benedito talked about collective responsibility and collective failure. So how do we chart our course out of this? At least for you, seeing things from the ground, and then we go to Ambassador Yad, and then Donna. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for this question that is actually really tough. I think that I'm just going to come back to one point that I said, that we need to have a seat at the table. And when I'm saying we need to have a seat at the table, it's not just the table where the international table. It's also the national one, because we need to make sure that all the different voices are being heard, are being concerned. I think that we are all aware of the fact that a country is being shaped by its agency, its institution, its history, its trauma. And the Sahel has a lot of trauma, and unfortunately, there is a lot more trauma that are happening as we speak right now, with the uprising insecurity in the northern part, in the Timbuktu region. So there is the importance of the dialogue. Again, I've talked about the dialogue among the former colonial power, the European country, and the country in the Sahel. But there's also the necessity of having the dialogue in place within the different actors in Mali, within the community, making sure also that they are being heard, that their voice are being listened to, because right now, who's paying the price? A few weeks ago, there has been an attack on a boat that was going from Moptigao to Timbuktu that has been attacked and that killed 70 civilian people. And what is all of that? What that is actually fueling is really, again, that an uprising in terms of insecurity, an uprising in hate speech, an uprising in so many different issues, and really there is really that necessity to keep on the dialogue going, making sure that people can talk to each other, so that we can find a solution. But you do understand that really the situation is in terms of insecurity, and I'm going back to insecurity because this is what is happening right now in Mali on the ground. But it's extremely difficult right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Yan. By the way, before you start, I just want to point something. In the many years I've been teaching international affairs, and I'm seeing more and more this recognition of trauma. You know, typically it was not a language that we use in international affairs. So I just want to thank you for pointing that out. I see just across, even at university, a lot of students talking about trauma within the international affairs setting. So I think this is something we need to pay attention to, and I expect in places like the Sahel or all these other regions that have gone through conflict for the last decades, this is something that we've not paid attention to. Ambassador.
So while you are paying attention to the trauma, so forget the word resilience, because this word resilience prevents from seeing the trauma. Africans, they suffer so much and they know how to suffer. So no need to take care of the trauma. That is a very, very old idea, and it brought a lot of damage on minds in Africa, because I don't know any people who have suffered so much throughout the centuries without any care of the psychological consequences for each individual and for the people too, you know, because all people from African descent carry that legacy, and it's heavy and heavy and heavy, and the word legacy, the word resilience doesn't help. So that said, what I just for the future, what could we do? So on the international space, I mean, I think it's there's no international space and the national space. I think both are linked, and in these countries that experience coup, even if people demonstrated their joy in the streets, I think it was temporary. They were so happy to get rid of the former powers that they celebrated the soldiers. But I think it's just for the short term, because what else now? Are they going to stay? Are they going to organize a civilian transition? Are they going to keep the power? To do what? That is a question. Can they keep the people far from the power? Are they going to watch their shoulders every day? Because if you take the power like this, it can be removed from you anytime by your neighbor and your cousin too. That's what happened in most of these countries. The coup didn't came from the oppositions. It came from, they were internal. It came from the former powers. I mean, it's not a democratic transition we have here. First, because they have taken the power without any authorization, first. And two, because they come from the former authoritarian regimes they criticize, right? Sometimes they come from the same families. Look, in Gabon, it's a cousin, right? The new president. So what about the democratic oppositions? That is a true question. Where are they? They have names. You know, Oduosa in Gabon, you have Céline Diallo in Guinea, you have a lot of people. And they have been struggling for decades on the ground, running for the elections, losing. Sometimes they did not lost. They have just, the elections were faked. So what about them? And the civil societies, those who have been associations, journalists, fighting on the ground, they are the opposition. They are the democratic opposition. So I think that's where we should start. If we want to empower the populations, that's what we should do. And the second point is about sovereignty. Because, we can blame external partners or enemies every day. There is a few things only Africans can do or are responsible for. And I wouldn't like we do this conversation by just blaming the others without talking about what Africans have to do. And I can say that because I have a part of Africa in me. So maybe between us we can say these kind of things. Of course, these powers have not been helped by these double standards and everything I already said. But they had the power to resist to that. They have the power to say no. They have the power to follow their own path and to promote their own views. Okay, there's corruption, but they don't have to accept to be corrupted either. So this is something that needs to be seriously considered because it's a matter of sovereignty. And I will finish by just saying that it's very important beyond the problems to highlight the African solutions too. Africans are not just like waiting for solutions from external, partners. They also have their own path and their own solutions when it comes to climate, for example. Africans have not waited for this topic to be trendy, to handle their own environment. They know how to do that. They have solutions about their own resources. I don't like when we say that the Sahel countries are poor. That's not true. They are not poor. They have a lot of resources. And these resources are not just allowed by their environment. It's not only about having lands, sun, or use. They are also builders. And I think it's very important to highlight what they build every day in terms of solutions, of action, and most of the time it can be very, very innovative. When it comes to democracy, for example, very often presented as an external good. African societies have also democratic traditions. But I'm not sure that people know, even Africans, because I'm not sure they know themselves about their own democratic traditions that exist everywhere. Across the continent. And I think it's very important for Africans to promote these democratic views they have from their own history. And who knows, maybe in the European democracies that are also experiencing crisis, they will be inspired by the African democratic traditions.
Okay. Thank you very much. So what I really get from your input there is that Africans have to look within as well. Maybe it's time to look for some local solutions to their own problems or the challenge they face, and not always using the framework. And I think Kamisa Kamara had mentioned that, the change of the framework that we need to use. Ms. Charles.
Thank you very much. And I will again keep my remarks very brief because I think Ambassador Yad and Ms. Konate covered the topics quite well. And I think it's important, again, to reemphasize that the agency of the African citizenry, needs to be first and foremost in this. That it cannot be a situation where we look to the international community to be the sole source of solutions, recommendations, and ways ahead in navigating out of this very challenging time for the region. And I think that's an important point, but I also would couple that with the idea that the international community has a very important role in this as well. I'm very much a proponent for the both and approach. The African citizen, the average person in Niger and Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, Gabon, the list goes on, Sudan as well. They have a role in all of this, but I believe that it is so important that they also realize, that person on the ground realize that the international community is listening. It hears them and sees them. And what we say and what we do not say matters so much in that entire process. We cannot be silent. We cannot shrug our shoulders. We cannot sit idly by. This has to be a process where international actors who have, long lamented the erosion of democracy all over the world must stand up and say, this is not right, this is not normal, and this is not fair to the person on the ground who expects more and deserves more. And so while I do think it is critical that the African populations most affected by this have the foremost role in affecting change and making their voices heard at the ballot box, I think the international community cannot allow these things to happen in an echo chamber, in a void space, and just shrug their shoulders and say that this is how things have to be, and we will continue on as if nothing happened. And that, I think, requires us to think very creatively about how we engage these transitional governments, these juntas, realizing that there has to be a carrot and stick approach to engaging on this front, because to allow business as usual provides, license, provides an open door for other aspirants to do the same thing. And so we have to think very creatively about what kind of messages we sent, what kind of actions need to be put on the table, and what do we do to empower communities on the ground who realize that this is not the way ahead. We also need to be mindful of the messages that we're hearing from people who may champion this type of change as a function of not having any other option, right? Realizing that some change is better than no change at all. And so therefore, if we have a military coup, then we have a military coup to get something moving. I think that we need to hear those voices and understand what the implications are for that kind of thinking. When it becomes entrenched, then it's almost a resignation of a process that they no longer have control over. And what are we doing as an international community, as members who are watching this with grave concern? What are we doing to ensure that we hear those messages and we act accordingly and let them know that there are other ways out of this? What resources are we willing to put on the table? From the diplomatic engagement side, from the civil society side, all of these things need to be done in a way that there's harmonization and that there's an understanding that those voices are just as important, if not more important, what we're hearing from youth, from women, from those who feel so disaffected by these processes that they just sort of throw up their hands and say, well, this is better than nothing. This is better than business as usual. This is better than the hollow democracy that we've been offered for years on end. So I will leave my remarks there by saying that everybody has a role. Agency is important for the person, but involvement and active participation, strong messaging in the right direction is also the role of the international community, those within the region and beyond. And we can't leave any of these things to chance and allow business as usual to become a calcification, if you will, of the situation in the region.
Thank you very much, Ms. Charles there. We have 2 questions. We have 3 minutes. And we're going to do this exercise. We tried that last time. Hopefully you guys can rise to the occasion. You're going to take 30 seconds to answer those questions. So, and you don't have to answer both of them. The U.S. has the Young African Leaders Initiative, YALI. Is this program sufficient? Should the EU put a similar program in place? That's question one. Question two, how do you combat the anti-West narratives and pseudo-Pan-Africanism when the social media literacy is so low? So we can start with Dusuba, since we talked about the social media. Start with that question, please. But 30 seconds. We really, I don't want to stand between you and lunch.
Yeah, okay. So the YALI program, what is really interesting is that it's push people to actually come back to their country and really to build something. So I think it's really great. I know a lot of people that are part of that program. If it's sufficient, no, obviously, no. Does the European Union should do something similar? Why not? I think it's just build upon that reinforcing of the capacity of the young people. And I think the more and more program we have like this, and the more it will benefit the African countries. The second question about social media. So as a civil society organization leader, we are putting in place some programming to really sensitize people on the type of information that they are seeing on I'm saying WhatsApp because WhatsApp is just like an amazing tool, and there are so many information that we're receiving, and it's not just youth, it's actually even elder people who are just transferring videos all the time. And that's an issue because, yeah, a lot of people are transferring a lot of fake news, a lot of fake information, and there's that necessity to do more sensitization so that people can actually ask themselves some question before transferring the content that they have. Because yes, it can be really harmful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A little over 30, but it's good. I salute your effort.
I did my best.
Donna, please, go ahead. Any of those questions, any one of those that you can take in 30 seconds?
Sure, I'll tackle the anti-West sentiment in a very brief point. I think the core issue here is having a nuanced conversation about what we're really seeing when it comes to the anti-Western sentiment. And I think anybody who's been looking at this problem set carefully will realize that it's not as simple as it's made to seem, especially in the media landscape that often relies on very digestible, short bursts of information rather than really diving into the context. And I go back to a point that Ms. Konate brought up, and also I think Ambassador Yan brought up too, is acknowledging the trauma, acknowledging the history of the region, acknowledging what many of these countries have gone through when it comes to colonization, when it comes to even the alienation that being sort of somewhat apart from the broader international community and not fully integrated from everything from international financial institutions, the list goes on. And so it's not really just about the history of colonization, but what happened after that, or what did not happen after that. And acknowledging that history, I think, will be key to us understanding how do we navigate this sentiment that appears to suggest that the United States and France, the United Kingdom, and a lot of these countries are losing influence significantly. I had a very interesting conversation with colleagues from Liberia, West Africa, where a lot of my family lives. That's where my mother is from, and she lives there. And there is a broad discussion about the role that the United States and a lot of these Western powers play when it comes to the democratic processes. Is there a credibility issue that we can work on? Are there ways that we can better navigate these spaces and ensure that we are not seen as detractors, we are not seen as malevolent actors, we are not seen as manipulators? And these conversations are important to have because it'll be key to us learning how we can change course, if that's possible at this point, and also have a more sophisticated conversation about what we truly mean by anti-Western sentiment. What do we truly mean by waning influence, and also realizing that our African partners must have agency to be able to say, we are not going to be beholden to this, one partner, the only partner option. We are now at a point where, as African governments, as African people, we are at a point where we no longer have to, abide by this idea that there's only one way to go when it comes to engaging on the international stage. And so that, I think, will also be key to ensuring that our credibility does not continue to erode in the region. Okay. That's all I have.
Thank you very much. Very elastic 30 seconds, but very enriching. So thank you. Rama, 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Yeah, about the YALI program. I think it's a good program. Every year at the Atlantic Council Africa Center, we host a YALI person to help for his or her training. So it's a good program. But Europeans have also programs like this, like Young Leaders, in France, or, so maybe it should be more formalized at the European Union level. I don't know, but it already exists. And your second question is about the West, the anti-West sentiment. So, I mean, Africans have changed a lot, and Africa has changed deeply, and Africans, and not only the young people, but also the others, they have demands, and that's something we have to take into consideration, empowered by the knowledge of their own history, stories, social media, education, trips everywhere in the world. So the situation is not the same. In Africa is a very dynamic, economically speaking, very dynamic continent. The house of green technologies, the youngest continent in the world, soon the largest. In 50 years, 1 out of 4 human beings will be African. It will be just crazy. You meet 1 person out of 4, that will be an African person. So it's, strategically speaking, it's a lot. The Westerns have to handle that, to do with that. So, because you have now 4 scenarios. Just nothing, withdrawal from Africa, but I'm not sure it's a good idea given what I just said. Africa is a matter of it is a strategic issue, and Europe, for example, which is a neighboring area, cannot ignore Africa by withdrawing from there. The second scenario is the statu quo. We don't do anything, we just wait. Obviously, it's not a good solution because of the global power competition. It's also possible to transform this national level relationship into a European Union partnership, for example, because the European Union is a pretty new vehicle. You can use it to transform your policy to Africa when it comes to Europeans, for example, rather than at a national level. That is much more difficult these days. But no matter what you do, I think it's very important to do a reset, to change the paradigm. When I was a member of the French government, I was in charge of foreign affairs and human rights. I did not do so much on the African continent, I must confess, because I knew that if I started, I could not stop. So too many things to change, and you want to blow everything up because you have to change everything. And you say, okay, can I try? No, I cannot, because I can engage this battle only if I can win it. I cannot afford to lose it. And the minds were not ready. So you do your own thing, women, child soldiers, and from time to time you speak up and you see that, wow, the effect is just crazy. The impact is just crazy. But what I'm saying is, now we cannot afford to wait or to be cautious, because the change of the paradigm is an emergency. So that's why I think the situation, the transatlantic dialogue, requires a glasnost and a perestroika, both at the same time.
Thank you very much. On this note, I would like to start by thanking our audience in the room, our audience online, our distinguished panelists, Ambassador Ramayad, Madame Doussouba Konate, Madame Donna Charles, and our partners, the European Union, which made this session possible. So thank you again for joining us, and thank you, European Union, for your partnership. And the Embassy of Spain, particularly, that is holding the presidency of the European Union. This is what you get when you deal with diplomats. So many levels. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.